All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first panel, the first day in professional development, capitalizing on the product using popular culture and online student engagement. Today, our panel is composed, our roundtable is composed of 4 people. Myself, I am an associate professor of communication at American Public University Systems. Garrett Castleberry, Associate Professor, Communication, and Chair of the Adult School of Arts and Sciences at Mid-America Christian University. Nicole Rothenay, she is an instructor in communication at American Public University System, and she has an MA in English and is a current MA PhD student in technical communication at Texas Tech. And Allison Slade, who is an Associate Professor of Communication at American Public University. So what we're going to do, we're each going to talk a little bit about how we use popular culture to facilitate engagement in online courses. And then we will have hopefully a robust question and answering discussion. So the first person who will be leading us off today is Garrett. Garrett, are you ready?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amanda, for that introduction. And thank you to this this division, this area for hosting us. It's exciting to be able to engage in. Wow, now we know who the 8 a.m.ers are, the early birds, right, that are ready to get their learn on, or perhaps get away from some other duties and responsibilities, which is also part of the fun. Anytime we can conference, whether it's in person or virtually. Well, we have a little mini program here today, and we're going to draw upon some personal experience. It's by no means autoethnography, but we're going to look at some practical ways we've implemented popular culture strategically as an educational tool. And hopefully this is going to build into some Q&A. If you have questions along the way, if something we say seems too fanciful, right? Fake news, let's engage that. We want to have some concrete feedback for you all. And later on, we want to hear what ways you've implemented kind of integrated popular culture into your classroom situations, whether it's assignments and so on. But I want to begin and talk about it at sort of a broad level, and really a pedagogical epistemology that I've developed over time is recognizing popular culture as a universal access point for us all. And we see this not only through maybe miscellaneous academic journals and things like that, but I want to really step outside the scope of higher ed. There was a period in which the internet was really coming of age, and everyone was bandwagoning these ideas, suggesting that through internet technologies, right, we were finally going to, the world was finally going to come together, right, and it was going to universalize. And then for a period, a lot of people held this position. And I mean, we can critique it. We can pull out all of our critical theories to critique this, but there is this popular position that, well, is the internet going to result in English becoming the dominant, global language? And that was kind of wrestled with and debated for a while. And then there was that clear counter argument of, well, if we're being technically clear, Mandarin might be just as popular, if not more so, in other parts of the world. And so we never quite decided on that. But one thing we have recognized over time, and especially as we become increasingly globalized, is that popular expressions, right, artistic forms are universal, and they share some universal values. And this is not just in terms of something like mythic archetypes, right? You could you go down that rabbit hole of Joseph Campbell, or which has been counter-critiqued, right, in recent years, by the way. But really this idea that humans are storytelling creatures, that we're natural creators, and that popular ideas persist over time, that they bring us together. And while at certain points in media history, we've seen dominance from different types of mass mediums, that's where there are some wrinkles in the equation of, so the world's brought together by film, or the world is brought together by television, or now streaming. And you can't quite say that, because in fact, as we've been brought together globally, technologically, this kind of fragments our options, right? With that nichification of popular culture, where everyone's got an algorithm that can send them in different directions. nonetheless, I want to kind of painting that wide picture to get us thinking about, to kind of charge us mentally about the value that popular culture brings as a connective tissue. I can tell a story. I was fortunate enough to have opportunities in an undergraduate level to get to travel each summer, and a lot of that travel was outside of the U.S. and it's several different continents, and those experiences marked me for life. And I think about the people I met and the cultural exchange I was a part of and what I gained from that all the time. But what was so impressionable to me is in those moments where you at first sense the separation of cultural interests, of backgrounds, and so on, the ways we were managing to find connectivity in exchanges, whether I was in some remote parts of Southern Africa or down in kind of central Mexico or even areas of China, people were using popular culture to bridge, to make connections, to say, like, here's something we know, here's some commonality we have and we share, right, for better or worse. And as I took on a role, not just in traditional higher ed situations in classrooms, but increased responsibilities with online education, I wanted to test those boundaries. I wanted to see if we could carry over some of the ways in which we understand cultural artifacts connecting us. And so the remaining portion, I'm about halfway done here, right? I've got the timer going, but one of the things I want to talk about is how at our university at Mac, we're a small private university, and with the kind of lack of size, it increases a hidden benefit is it increases flexibility. It increases our ability to adopt and adapt to things, but also experiment and not be afraid to maybe learn through experimentation, not be afraid to fail like a social scientist, right? And so we've adopted as our communication within our communication, media, and ethics degree program. That's our program title, and it's kind of centered on its tiers of emphasis include media studies, a combination of PR or advertising, marketing, right, all kind of mixed together, and social media studies. And communication is sort of the umbrella under which they all occupy some tier space. And the through line that we've used to connect with our students, to connect with adult learners, to connect with students that are maybe dipping in from the traditional physical campus, is using pop culture. And what we can gain through that is an understanding that people have different entrance points and access points, but we can, I don't know how many folks remember the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's, that's basically, I feel like that game just sort of inspired the entire, pop culture landscape in some ways. It's all connected now, right? But Kevin Bacon was multiversing before everyone else. But we've adopted a kind of effort to intentionally and strategically blend pop culture into not just a class or class throughout the major, because we're working with some different types of challenges in terms of, you have students coming back in non-traditional settings, quote unquote, increasingly traditional, by the way, but they bring hesitancies, they bring different outside experiences, and we want to merge these together versus students that maybe lack experience, they lack knowledge. And so you're trying to find ways to tether these conversations together, to not allow these students to be in silos, kind of independently working through the curriculum, even if the class is asynchronous, right? Working at distinct paces. Well, I want to close with 3 different examples that we have utilized to not only integrate students with popular culture and ways that we maybe discuss them, but also some of the scholarly readings we connect them with, as well as media screenings, right? That's that labor of studying popular culture intentionally actively rather than passively. And that gets at some of our educational outcomes, which is to help I'm trying to look at the shift from passive modes of leisurely media consumption to active modes of critical reasoning. And so we're using it as a lens to develop critical thinking skills, which common across the humanities, but also increase their ability to perform in a variety of situations, their ability to take elements and adapt it to different circumstances. So a couple of closing examples in our media culture and social influence class. We may hear a little bit about this type of course later, so I'll just leave it at a tease. We built the course around this idea of, let's use the spy genre as a tool with which to inform on basic introduction to communication theories and methods, right? How can we use that genre to metaphorically explore theory and method at a rudimentary level? Second example, in closing here, our special topics in media studies. And we have this class, we get to explode in a number of directions. One of our directions is the subtitle Mythic Media in America. And we prime students to study the graphic literature, right? The comics medium, and they get to explore it through different mass mediums, but primarily through that print, that literary medium that we associated with in its infancy. And final example in closing here is our communication and cultural change class. And this is a backdoor into a very popular course people are lining up to want to teach in academia and media studies right now, an intro to television studies class. And so what we provide in this course is a media history class, but because we're running at an accelerated pace in our online schedules, limiting or narrowing the focus of how we study media history is important. And given that other classes may study comics, other classes may study radio or podcasting, other classes and courses may engage film, we use this class to chart media history through the mass medium of television. So we look at television history specifically in a narrowed focus and break the units almost into temporal decades so that we can chart change and progress. And we've shifted even in that class from rigorous scholarly writing as the sole focus to more project heavy professional development. And students have responded favorably. But I want to close with this point, that the changes we continue to make in these classes absolutely have to do with the qualitative feedback that we're getting back from students, how these curriculum designs impact them, and what they're getting out of it, and what they report back, what they would prefer to do differently, how they feel like they would be even more encouraged to participate in that educational culture. Thank you all. And I believe at this point we're going to transition to Allison. Dr. Slade's going to share with us some of her pedagogical insights and experiences. So Allison, take it away.
Thank you, Garrett. Okay, so for me, I think it's interesting that I teach at a variety of different places, even though my full-time gig is at American Public University System, excuse me, but I also teach part-time for Garrett, and I've done that for about 6 years now. And so I have the benefit of seeing two different universities that are both online and fully remote, and are for me fully remote. I know that Garrett has on-ground classes as well, but I do not live in Oklahoma. So, and so for me, I feel like we are surrounded by pop culture all the time, every day. And so we can draw our inspiration for examples that we use with students from a variety of different places. And I think that is interesting. I mentioned that it's different in two different places that I teach in because of the way the curriculum is designed, 8-week courses versus 5-week accelerated courses, subject matter that is more, I don't want to use the word strict in its strictest sense, but at APUS we have 8-week classes that are kind of a template that is used, and I feel like we do have academic freedom and leeway to do certain things, but a lot of times the template is followed, and it's easier to follow that template at APUS and easier to shift some things and have more leeway at MACU. And so my examples I wanted to give you are primarily from MACU, because I do feel like that we use the video discussions to create online engagements with students, and that gives a lot of freedom for students to have feedback as well. And my purpose in using pop culture for online engagement is to really get the students to be more reflective and, talk about their experiences and engagement with pop culture as it relates to the content that we're doing in the classes. And so the first example I'm going to give is from a course that I teach sometimes called Digital Media Literacy. And it is pop culture heavy in certain instances with some readings. And so one of the things that I do for a video discussion in that course, it was actually inspired by me seeing a commercial myself. So I was watching TV, YouTube TV, and I saw a commercial for Domino's Pizza, and it was about avoid the Noid. And so I was like, wow, really? The Noid is back? And so for me, I was like, this is great. And so it just so happened that we were coming up on a unit in that class about nostalgia. And so my initial response was, okay, so I was like 10 when Avoid the Noid came out the first time. And then I got to thinking, so that took me back to my childhood with pop culture. And then I got to thinking that the new improved graphic design of the Noid is new to a whole new generation. And so a lot of my students, even though I teach online, a lot of students are adult learners. But then again, there's the occasional, even at APUS, the occasional 18-year-old fresh out of high school who could, is old enough to be my child, who doesn't perhaps know some of the older references. And so my question for them on nostalgia was, about how it evokes certain memories. And I asked them to create a response, bringing their own artifact of nostalgia to the table to share with other students. And what happens is because I'm older than a lot of the students at MACU for sure, is I get a lot of things that I'm familiar with, but it's really interesting to see how they perceive pop culture from their generation and what would evoke nostalgic feelings for them using pop culture. So for example, I often have students doing like Tamagotchi. And I don't know if you guys remember that, but the little watches that, had the little pets and you could take care of them and love them and everything. So for them, that's a generational thing. I mean, I remember those. And again, since pop culture goes through cycles, inevitably we will see different elements pop up in a nostalgic conversation. And then, asking them why it's important and how it makes them feel. And again, we see the cycle repeating itself over and over again. And so I always tell them in my video discussion prompt that, I'm older, and that likely, since I have a lot of children, I have 5 children, I've probably seen and run the gamut of all of the ideas that they're going to have that brings them back to their childhood. My oldest child is 20 and it ranges down to age 10. So I have, a wide experience myself with those sorts of things that kids would bring home. So if you're going to talk about Hatchimals, I got you. Right. Or Furbies or whatever. And Pokemon is back. So my 20-year-old in college is still ordering Pokemon cards and asking me to go look for Pokemon cards for him. So sometimes that rears its head. Okay. And so that's my first example. And again, it's all about asking the student to really engage with those artifacts that mean something to them as far as the nostalgic discussion is concerned. My second example is also from digital media literacy. We talk about participatory culture and fan culture and how we are active participants in pop culture all of the time. And so for this assignment for the video discussion, I have asked students in the past to pick their favorite television show, movie, if they don't like TV and movies, because occasionally we have students who do not watch TV. That blows my mind because I'm a TV junkie. I'm a couch potato. I usually write about television. So I'm like, what? No TV? How do you live? Okay. But, so if they don't watch TV or film or have a favorite film, I ask them to do sports because inevitably someone might have a favorite sports team that they can become familiar with. And for this, I kind of want to combine pop culture with online presence and fan cultures. And I asked them to go to fan sites of their favorite TV show, movies, or sports to look at how fans interact with one another and the different pop culture elements that could possibly be present there. And what's cool about this particular assignment to me is that I get to learn about perhaps some TV shows or movies that I've never seen or heard of. Inevitably, that does happen, even though I am a couch potato. Also, sports teams. Sports teams to me is probably more fascinating because the way we engage with our sports teams and the way we engage with our fandom of said sports team can be quite fanatic and sometimes very emotionally charged. And so students often, even if they have a favorite TV show or movie, I have found they always say, well, even though I love this show, I'm a huge fan of blah sports team. And let me tell you, the engagement and the heated discussion and the debates and, actually here in the South, I'm in the South. And so I follow SEC football and it's basically a religion here. It truly is. And so a lot of themes can come out from those different things. And so that always is a great discussion that students can have on that. Along the same lines in that class, we talk about the business of pop culture and economics. And one of the best examples I have found for that is about Beanie Babies, because Beanie Babies, you still see them. My children have them. Every once in a while, you'll get one at a McDonald's Happy Meal still. Hey. But talking about the Beanie Baby bubble and how, the Beanie Baby fad started, and then how the economics kind of killed it. I mean, hula hoops have been around since the 1950s. We still sell hula hoops and catch them off Mardi Gras floats. They have staying power, but clearly the people who thought Beanie Babies would make them $1 million 20 years down the road, is not happening. And so I have like this huge box of Beanie Babies that does me nothing but be in a box of Beanie Babies. I don't think I have the rare platypus that is going to make me the 10K on eBay, but it goes to show students again how the economics makes a difference in pop culture and how we interact with those artifacts as well. And another final example that actually, and Garrett kind of previewed it, I also teach the media culture and social influence class. And so in that class, we talk a lot about communication and culture and identities, and that is actually where we are this week in the course. And so my pop culture example discussion prompt for them this week was about taste cultures and how our own cultural identity goes into the memberships that we have regarding taste cultures. And I think when you say the words like high culture, low culture, or, it kind of can't be, not confusing is not the right word, but I think students have a perception then, that certain groups are perhaps are mutually exclusive, and that's not true, right? Because we can appreciate going to an opera just as easily as appreciate going to, now I don't appreciate this, but like a NASCAR race. Even though I'm in the South, don't believe the stereotype. I do not watch NASCAR, but hey, there you go. So I asked students this week to think about what group memberships they have as it relates to their identity for pop culture and taste culture, and how they interact with those taste cultures, and also what stereotypes it might perpetuate about them. Because as we know, immediately when I say NASCAR, I mean, I made a joke about myself and about the fact that I live in the South, but when you hear terms like NASCAR or, Southeastern Conference college football, you automatically, or most people would automatically have images of what types of membership that group might entail. And so to break down some of those stereotypes and to try and show that it's universal, perhaps, the taste culture and the elements that we can have in both high and low culture. So that's pretty interesting to me as well. And at APUS, I do just want to mention that that is my full-time gig. And so the way we use pop culture at APUS is a little bit different, but it allows the opportunity for students to engage online. So an example might be the fact that we use more video elements as far as examples for students to be able to discuss. So for example, in our conflict and communication class, there's a week discussion where we engage with clips from Seinfeld that have all been put together, and looking at the different conflicts between Seinfeld and George and Kramer and Newman and how they interact, and then being able to talk about the way they handle conflict and confrontation, which obviously is more comedic in nature, but it does, speak to the elements. And I have found that the weeks that in discussions and classes that we have those video pop culture references, that the discussion is often more engaging because they can watch the video and then they can tell us, oh, it was funny, or, oh, this, I used to watch this show, or, the discussion just, lends itself to be more lively and more productive, I think, when we have those pop culture elements in it versus read this article and tell us what you thought was great. And so, that can tend to be boring, and you tend to not be able to respond to students in certain instances. I mean, there's only so many things you can say if they all read the same article and all had the same thought about said article. So anyway, that is my take on and personal examples of using pop culture. It surrounds us all the time. And I think that we can definitely guide our curriculum to be more connected to pop culture, because students, they love it. And it does bridge generations. As I said, it goes through cycles. So, we have a whole new set of people who, if you didn't skip through the ads on your TV program, you got to see the Noid once again from, gosh, is it 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Oh gosh, 30 years ago. That makes me feel really old to even think about timelines like that. But okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and Nicole is going to discuss her take on pop culture in the online classroom.
Okay, so hi, I am Nicole Rothenay. I am an instructor also at American Public University System, where I teach full-time in the digital communication and media design concentration. I'm going to apologize because my children have not been feeling so well. So I have one on my lap because she didn't want to sit on the floor anymore, but you might see them walking around in the background. So that's my disclaimer. I'm just not going to turn off my camera. So that's what real life looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and start my own timer here so that I'm staying on track. But introducing myself, I guess I have already said that I'm an instructor, but I want to highlight that I'm also a current graduate student with working on my second master's and a PhD in technical communication. I'm interested in professional communication and user experience. And for me, an ongoing engaging question that I care about is how do we create engaging moments in online classrooms? I do work fully remote. And so I'm a fully remote student, I'm a fully remote employee, and I work with students who are all doing the same thing. And clearly that can be a little bit challenging. So I'm always looking at the practical aspects of how we can make online discussions more engaging. This is my first time at PCA and it's been wonderful. I haven't really seen anybody talk yet because we are one of the first presenters, but I'm really looking forward to, sorry about that, to the awesome presentations that we're gonna have. I might actually turn off my camera, but I'll keep talking. Hold on one second. So I'm looking forward to the wonderful presentations that we're going to have. So one second.
Real life happens. Real life happens. People have kids, kids get sick. It happens.
Sorry about that. So my focus that I wanted to kind of share today is how, as a new instructor, I've just really finished up my first year of teaching. And as a grad student, I am working within a set curriculum. Like Allison mentioned, I often don't get to change the assignments in my classes. I'm often given a template for what I'm going to teach. And the discussions are often already set. And even though I do have freedom as a course manager to change those, many of our adjunct instructors do not. And so I really want to talk to you if you're in that position as a grad student or as a new instructor who maybe do not have as much freedom, how you can still incorporate pop culture moments, which is what I care about. So this for me has been the answer to that question of creating engaging moments in online courses. So I really value including pop culture in all of my courses as often as I can, but of course I'm still learning how and where I can do that. So I mentioned that I am mostly interested in the digital communication and media design concentration, and I therefore work with a lot of social media technology and digital media platforms in my courses, and those are constantly evolving and changing. So textbook and course materials, even when we use really great ones or really high quality course materials, they still rarely keep up with current events. And that change can be frustrating or in some cases amusing to students who, when they're reading about social media, you know, they'll say things like, this platform doesn't exist anymore. This platform isn't relevant anymore. We don't really care as much about this platform. And so I like to use when students are running into that outdated material in their assigned readings or lessons, I like to introduce different pop culture movements to be an easy or quick way to balance those quick moving topics. So just like Allison did, I'm going to give 3 quick examples, and then also I'm going to discuss kind of the way more abstractly that I view how I incorporate pop culture into what I am talking about. So the 3 classes I'm going to talk about are 211, and that number means nothing to you, of course, but a social media and society class I teach, a intercultural communication course I teach, and then finally an interpersonal communication course that I teach. So these are all fully online and asynchronous courses. All of the information is already set. When I go to start teaching a class, I have the assignments already set. I have the discussions already set. And I just kind of go with what's there. And I can make changes myself to announcements, and then what I call discussion kickoffs and weekly wraps, which is what I will be talking about in my examples. So for my social media and society class, students are of course sharing and exploring social media examples throughout the course, but they have various levels of both interest and familiarity with social media. So some students are business owners, for instance, and they actually actively promote and market on social media. So they're very familiar with how social media works and they enjoy finding examples. But I also have students who don't like that as much and tend to like, what is Facebook? I'm not going to look at Facebook. I'm going to go find an article that talks about how businesses are doing things instead of going to look at it myself. And so in that class, especially, I like to provide examples of how students can engage critically with social media. So one week that we do is our favorite, and hopefully I'm not stealing thunder from Amanda because I feel like she likes this class as well. But we do a talk where we explore influencers. And so after the discussion forum for the week, what I usually try to do, and sometimes I do it at the beginning, sometimes I do it at the end, it's still a work in progress, trying to figure out the best way to introduce this. But I'll share what I call a weekly wrap in the forum. So our forums open up on Monday. Students have until Thursday to post their initial reply. And then they have until Sunday to do their 2 peer replies. And so usually on Friday, after they have all hopefully already posted their initial reply, I'll share a weekly wrap that says, thank you for sharing your thoughts on what you found out about influencers. And then I'll share an extra bonus. It's never required, but I'll share like an extra bonus piece of content. For me in this class right now, it's a clip I found that shows an insider perspective on influencers. And I'll invite students to think if that insider perspective has changed the way they think about influencers and social media. Because most often, especially for students who don't engage as much with social media, they say, you know, influencers just make a lot of money. And if you have explored them, you know that is not always the case. So my next example comes from a course on intercultural communication. And it's less relevant because we are talking more about speaking across cultures. And so I don't always go out of my way to include pop culture moments, but our final discussion in that class asks students to explore blockbuster theory and cultural imperialism, which is always a really entertaining discussion because this is mostly military students and our demographic skews heavily towards older white male. And so it's really interesting to see the variety of perspectives that come out. And so for that class, I typically will individually respond to each student discussion. It's one of my favorite discussions. So I don't do this in every class. It's just one of these classes that I actually enjoy doing it. It tends to be a smaller class. And I'll really try to critically engage with them about what they're sharing and what they're thinking to provide specific examples that they could go look at, often that challenge their own perspectives. So if they think, we'll just leave it at, so I was going to pull up an example, but I don't have that one. The last one I did want to share is on a course that I'm teaching right now on interpersonal communication. We are discussing actually this week beauty bias. And so what I've done is probably one of my most common moves is at the beginning of the week, I share a what I call just a kickoff post. It's not me, I didn't make it up, right? It's just what I was told is an engaging strategy that I found. But in my kickoff post on Monday, before usually the first student even shares in the discussion forum, I'll put in just a really quick and easy, hey, you read the prompt, here's what it says, you had all these assignments, here's something else you could look at. And so depending on the course and the discussion, I'll share different things that they could look at. And in this class, I share a movie clip from what to me is a classic, Mean Girls, where they're asking, this is on beauty bias, so they're asking, well, do you think you're pretty? And I have realized that very little of my audience actually recognizes that film clip. So I have to provide, of course, a little bit of extra background information, and I can just link it to a quick wiki or IMDb profile if they really want to understand more about them. But then I invite students to, in addition to the readings that they have already done, that if they want to add in an extra thought about how that movie clip, or if I'm sharing a movie clip, sometimes I share a TED Talk about how that changes the articles that they've read, that they can do so in their original discussion response. So those were my major 3 examples that I wanted to share, but I'll kind of abstractly talk about those moves that I typically make. And the 3 moves that I usually have are in the discussion forums, because we do weekly discussion forums in lieu of meeting in class, because we are an asynchronous course. I do a initial kickoff post. I do a final weekly wrap. And depending on the course and how big the course is, I also will do individual, that's my timer telling me to stop talking, but I will also do individual student responses. So I will tell a student in the discussion forum, hey, I think that's a great idea that you had, but here's another way you can think of it. Or I'll invite them to share more specific examples. And I typically will very clearly request them to think of engaging moments that are in popular culture today. Can you give me an example of that? Where have you seen that in TV or in the media? Or if you like social media, where have you seen that on social media? And then I had put down, I was going to talk about announcements, but announcements is also another place that sometimes if I feel like I can't quite get it into the discussion forum, I will also include engaging moments sometimes in announcements. This has probably been more often in other classes that I've taught, but I think I had an instructor who shared memes in the weekly announcement every week, and that was always a great way to kind of engage with students. And so I occasionally will also do something similar. I will include either just a quick little moment that relates to pop culture that hopefully my students get. So that's really all I had for today, and thank you so much for listening. So, and I'll pass it right back off to Amanda.
Right. Thank you, Nicole. I love that Mean Girls idea. I might have to borrow that and stick that into my courses too. Yeah, so lots of great stuff. The 3 people who spoke before me, lots of great examples. I'm just going to briefly talk about some general thoughts and then a couple quick examples, and then we will have a great discussion. There's already been some interesting things happening in the chat. So first of all, I've been teaching online since 2015. And I truly believe that what's happening outside of the classroom in terms of popular culture needs to be brought into the classroom. It gives a point of reference for students and to understand any sort of theoretical ideas that we're talking about. It really can help facilitate understanding. And then, of course, having all these popular culture examples in the classroom can help facilitate engagement as well. So when I used to teach in person, I would say, college is what you make of it. If you go to office hours, if you participate in class, you will get more out of college. And now I have the same idea about online, and it has to do with engagement. The more you participate in a class, the more you engage with your professor, the more you engage with your peers, the more students are able to learn in their courses. And what is a good way to facilitate engagement? It's through popular culture. It's something that students find generally easy to talk about, and most of them can understand that. Even if they haven't done the reading or they found the reading too difficult, they can engage on an idea in relation to popular culture. So through that engagement, we have a deeper learning. So I teach a lot of the same courses that the people who went before me have already talked about, and do a lot of the similar things. I'm just going to touch on quick ideas. And one of those is TED Talks, which I'm sure a lot of you are already putting into your classrooms. They have a great way of distilling dense ideas into bite-sized, understandable words and experiences. So instead of a dense reading, we have that TED Talk. Students, especially online students, I suppose, enjoy watching videos. Not something I really like to do, but students enjoy doing that instead of a reading. And a lot of times the ideas are very similar. And the second thing that I like to do is have students actually do an analysis instead of just watching a TED Talk or watching a speech in a public speaking class. I like to have them actually do something. So in one class, in one of the intro digital media classes that I teach and I have taught before, we talk about conducting a critical analysis, like a textual analysis of a piece of media. And so I'll have students actually take a television show or a movie that they've watched, record themselves answering questions about the movie and sort of breaking it down and analyzing based on race, gender, and class. And students get into that. People have a favorite movie. A lot of times they want to analyze it. And so they're able to take concepts like race, gender, and class, which if you haven't had in a course, you may not really be thinking about that all the time, and apply that to a media text they're familiar with. And it really helps them understand the concepts that we talk about in class and that they've read about by actually doing. Sometimes having that experience produces that epiphany of understanding, that aha moment, right? And that's what you're really wanting when you teach. You want that breakthrough moment where students understand what we're talking about and what we're learning about. And popular culture can really make that happen, I have found. So we have some questions already made up, and I'm just going to open up the questions and the Q&A and the discussion period by putting a question into the chat. And this is, I think, an interesting question. And it says, are there certain types or genres of popular culture that are more suited to the online classroom? We were talking before this about spy movies and spy genre. Is that well suited to online? Is that kind of an outdated concept? Comics, do comics translate well to online courses? Something that's that you would actually read offline? Or is there something, I guess, meme culture would translate well to an online class, right? What do you guys think? Does anybody want to jump in? The popular is personal. So I believe this is Garrett talking in the chat. Garrett, is that you?
Yes. Busted. Yes. So great secondary chat going on. If anyone wants to chime in there and feels like their voice is more, suited in a textual format, by all means, feel free to bounce between forms of communication exchange here. I'd kind of thrown out this question. It's a biggie. It's perhaps an area that's invisible to some of us, but as it increasingly over the years, as I've gotten more involved in administrative sides of academia and understanding the need for not only educational outcomes, but program outcomes and measuring student learning outcomes. I hope I didn't lose anybody there. It becomes important to, and I think this is a big humanities wide issue, it becomes important to be able to justify what we're talking about, what we're interested in doing, but demonstrating that there is true value, not possible value or potential value, but there's deep value in integrating popular culture in the classroom. And so if I was going to say I may have I didn't pull up any of our assessment rubrics, but I'd certainly be happy to connect and share those, kind of like examine what I mean by that. But basically take assignments that integrate popular culture and recognize their value for charting progress that students make over the course of time. And Allison's filed some of these for us for ours in the past. So I'm appreciative she could probably echo what I'm saying here, but looking at where they can kind of make leaps in critical thinking or strengthening their ability to strengthen digital communication skills in various modalities, right? As well as experience producing a variety of writing styles or professional communication styles across numerous platforms. I love the examples we got from Nicole and then Amanda about the role that we understand written discussion as that traditional modality in online learning, but we push our comm students, especially because it's communication, we want them to produce video discussion as well. We want them to be creating video, the instructors create video prompts, students create video responses, and then maybe we're doing some writing in between to kind of respond to one another. But but we're pushing them to engage digitally in addition to written, in addition to oral communication forms. And guess what? These are measurable tools. We can measure their progress along the way. And this can give us, this can kind of equip us to make those strong justifications for why we're making the kind of strategic curriculum design choices that we're making with regards to including popular culture in big ways, but maybe even, well, small ways, but possibly big ways as well.
Well, and I'll just go ahead and yes, Lindsay, I think that comment is amazing, actually. And the visual rhetoric of advertisements is kind of how I swept into comm. I came from an MA in English, and I was studying literature, and I kept finding that I was studying pop culture instead and connecting pop culture and social media to modernist texts. And so I think that's a really interesting topic. So, and I would be curious to also how you promote that discussion, and then what you're seeing as a need rather than as a side lecture.
I don't want to like take up your time, but since you asked, a lot of 1301, we talk about what strategies are to look at text, to look at words, to look at communication. And so a lot of that is like, you don't have to look at a scholarly article, you can look at an advertisement, like what is this saying? And we start with memes. So I just ask them to bring in their favorite meme, and then we look at, okay, what is the audience? What is this meme actually saying? And then they kind of are like mind blown for a minute. It's like, wait a minute, memes actually have media liter. What? I didn't like this. I thought it was just funny. And I'm like, okay, well, why is it funny? You have to talk about it. And so all of those things sort of come into play before, and that's sort of our last unit. But before we talk about media literacy, so where did your source come from? Who is the audience, that type of thing. And then when we start applying it to advertisements or memes or something like that, then they start to go, oh, dang, this isn't everything, isn't it? Like, yes, of course it is. It's everywhere. You're always engaged in popular culture and in this sort of realm of being active participants in the world that you're in, even if you don't know it. So that's sort of how I start that.
Thank you for that comment, Lindsay. That's really interesting. Yeah, that the students don't, a lot of students don't realize, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations, that we're surrounded by media. It's everywhere, right? And from ads on your Instagram feed to billboards to anything, right? Television's playing in the supermarket when you check out. And that visual literacy is really important too. You might see a lot of, one of my favorite things to notice is the banal nationalism, when you have red, white, and blue just hanging out everywhere. You walk into the post office, everything's red, white, and blue. And just seeing that, how they're constantly promoting America, right? And it's not something that we even notice anymore. We don't even see it, but it's there, right? And it's the same thing with those beauty images, like in that picture you just held up of the white woman with the, I think it was like 4 strips or something, right? That white standard of beauty with the fair skin and the symmetrical face and maybe blonde hair. Students need to interrogate those ideas because they permeate our culture, right?
Nicole, I had a question, just pinging off of your presentation earlier. How do you all define, maybe collectively versus individually or formally, pop culture moments? What do you consider a pop culture moment that is part of your that pedagogical strategy? What are you looking at identifying in that instance?
I think that's an awesome question. I don't know that we do this collectively yet. We may do that a little bit more moving forward as we take lessons learned from this wonderful conversation back. But I feel like just in prepping for this meeting, that this was kind of what I was noticing that I was doing. And so I started kind of using this word. And so I think even in my own notes, I was like, how am I doing or introducing like pop culture micro moments? Only because that's the way that I find myself incorporating them into this classroom. And I think we have all kind of done that. And we've talked about it a little with each other, but I don't know that we've done it explicitly until after this talk. So for me, I like that Amanda's putting them in there. The pop culture moments or micro moments are, for me, it has to be really short because I'm asking students essentially to engage with more reading. They've already done reading for the week. They're online all of the time. They're reading all of the announcements. They're reading all of the course lessons. They're reading discussion forums. They're reading their peer replies. We're asking them usually to do a weekly discussion forum. I know sometimes we do some optional ones. I don't do optional ones. I make them do the discussions every week. And then they also have assignments. And so they're reading and engaging a lot with lots of online and lots of writing and video and sometimes podcasts. And I know that it can be a lot. And so for me, when I'm trying to inject pop culture to help increase the engagement and to keep them interested, it has to be small and it has to be short. I don't know that I have a definition per se, but what I've been kind of operating from is that if I'm going to share another thing, it needs to be a different modality from what they've been mostly reading throughout the week. So if I've been asking them to listen to podcasts or watch a lot of videos as part of the normal online lessons, then I'm going to give them a very short, easy to engage with, maybe interactive article or a website or an article online. But most of what they do is read articles, right? Sometimes journal articles, and sometimes they're easy, right? News-based articles that are relatively engaging, but I like to kind of change that modality by providing, as Amanda mentioned, like a TED Talk is one of my favorites. But even those tend to be long. So I will usually find like a 5-minute or shorter TED Talk. That Mean Girls clip I found was 45 seconds. For me, it was ideal. It was under 2 minutes. It was something that in our system we use, Brightspace, I think it's called. I think they have a new name, but I can put the video in there so they don't even have to like navigate out to YouTube. They can just press play. So I make sure that I'm embedding it to reduce as much friction as possible. And then I make everything optional. So it's like a very small extra learning moment to help them, especially with dense material, to make it a little easier to engage with. So for me, I guess micro just means it's short, it's small, and it's easy, and it's relevant and current, or more current than what they're reading for that week. Great question. I'll talk about that some more eventually.
I think that's Garrett posting about the pop culture moments bring to mind John Fisk's notion of the mass media pseudo event, right? So that greatly predicted the video soundbite we witness on social media every day now. Oh, sure. So a ton of pseudo events, right? Do you want to talk about that, Garrett? Or
I can. There's I believe the media events book from the mid 90s that John Fisk produced that went through, we were going through this evolution and really what looked like a kind of final cry of cable, and the cable news cycles were becoming in vogue. And because of the increased mass media culture, the book chapters focus on different pseudo events or media events, and he likens them to things like the captured video footage of the Rodney King beating, the incidents that led to the riots in LA that weren't just from that event, but other like racial tensions. There was an incident that was caught on a sort of surveillance camera in a store where it was within the kind of Asian American community, right? So this kind of like kind of interurban conflicts that were happening, they were getting mediated, and they were collectively creating this growing tension in that metropolitan area. And but he considers these events like the O.J. Simpson trial and the like, they feel real and important and big, and they're magnified in the moment. And then if you kind of objectively step back and step away from it, there is that sense of, what are we doing, right? Of the world, there are big, it's like the difference between like, oh no, this, can you believe what happened at the Oscars, versus the sort of trauma and dehumanization and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Then, so this kind of tension between pseudo events versus what we could consider quote unquote media events that have urgency and sustainable effects on society.
Yeah, totally. So the pseudo events reminds me of Debord's idea of the spectacle, right? So
Sure.
we have spectacle, the pseudo event, things that maybe are not really hard news. And we pay more and more attention to those instead of hard news, like the slap on the Oscars, rather than goings on with the Supreme Court, right?
Mhm.
Allison is bringing up an example of the viral story on the beer guy from Iowa who donated and worked with Budweiser. Yeah, I remember that. So that guy had a skeleton in his closet about prior social media posts. So there's always these things happening in media, whether they're real or not important, that you can engage with in the classroom. And I think that bringing in current events, whether they be pseudo events or the war in Ukraine, is a great way to understand theory and a great way to understand the world itself by applying theory to it.
The great
Right.
thing about current events is there will always be more events, right, that continue to stream out. And this was that formerly I worked as a speech and debate coach and director, and one of the things it taught me, I didn't always love debate, even when I was involved in forensics. I always liked the performative side and kind of the formal speech making, giving side, some of those elements. But but what I value long term from the debate experiences inside of that is the discipline and the training of being able to tap into cultural current events without getting overwhelmed by them, which I think is is an enormous reason why people do get overwhelmed by them and maybe even manipulated by current events and headlines, but also misled, right? Or too emotionally distraught to the point that now we're turning it off. Like now we're turning a blind eye to everything because it's too much. It's being able as a kind of pedagogue to keep an ear out there without getting just emotionally put through the ringer on a day-to-day basis. That's important. Sometimes we just have to challenge ourselves to say it's good to stay, keep your toes dipped in the water on current events, but don't allow the current, we're using this river metaphor throughout the hour, don't allow the current to pull you in and drown you, because it absolutely can. And we know this after controversial election seasons and the mass mediation of the pandemic, and right, these kinds of large scale events have taken tolls in various ways. And there are times we can just debrief, breathe, and kind of cling tight to our convictions, and but through objectivist perspectives, not get weighted down by the mania, the spectacle, as Amanda, because media is spectacle.
Right.
So a great term to insert there, Amanda.
Thanks. I'm throwing out another question that we had discussed earlier when we were prepping for this roundtable. And it says, what arguments can we make to protect the incorporation of popular culture or focus areas in an era of increased scrutiny against higher ed and the humanities in particular? And I think people will know that sometimes people think that pop culture shouldn't be in the classroom, right? That it doesn't have any value. And I'm sure the conference attendees will beg to differ, but I have been at other academic conferences where people question why pop culture should be used in classrooms. So especially as we're moving to online courses, and sometimes there's some scrutiny about online courses in general, if they're living up to the standards that are in place for face-to-face courses. What arguments can we make to protect pop culture in the classroom?
I'd love to know, as people are forming their answers, I'd just love to know also on top of that, what are some of our attendees? How do you integrate popular culture in the classroom? What examples are you, what texts or what methods are you using? I'd love to know. This can be a sharing forum. We encourage that. We want to know what other people are doing, maybe what questions they have about integrating pop culture. That we want that channel to flow both ways this hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in if you can see me and hear me.
Yeah, we see you and hear you.
I'm stale right now. I've been failing on incorporating it well. I feel like, unfortunately, we get into these jobs where we're hired to teach, but ultimately teaching becomes sort of our lowest priority with all
Mhm.
the administrative stuff we're given. So I'm here for ideas, but I find that, in my lack of being able to prepare, know exactly what my students are doing, I make it student-led now. So when I'm thinking about conversations about what we should discuss or what's going on in the world, I try to make them tell me and then we use those discussions, and I try and then do it on the fly, right? Bring up some examples that maybe they do. I've when I can't think of a good example for something, I'll create a discussion post and be like, post something that you saw that made you think of this. And so it's been unfortunately terrible on my part, but it's turned into some good conversations because it's stuff that they have chosen, stuff that they want to talk about. It kind of turns into a show and tell almost. And then, they have to sort of justify why it is that they did that. But that's really all. Although I will say one of my favorite examples is from the Lego movie, when they're singing "Everything is Awesome" and it's showing all the rules. And I use that when I'm teaching like Frankfurt School and stuff. so so that's a fun example. But other than that, I'm just here for ideas, and I've appreciated the ways that you guys are talking about incorporating different types of digital and media and visual literacy. So yeah, really, I'm just here to learn, but thank you all very much.
I think you bring up a great point about student-led, discussions and involving pop culture. That is absolutely wonderful, because I have found that at APUS, I also, like I said earlier, struggle to incorporate things in that job because we are busy with other things, and it is a heavy teaching load and more facilitating and grading and those sorts of things that kind of can weigh you down from doing the things that you really love, right? Which is talking about these ideas and presenting this, pop culture examples and getting to incorporate it. And so going along with that, with the student-led discussion at APUS, I have found that some of my best examples of being able to post examples such as the beer guy, that actually came to my head after a student mentioned something in an ethics discussion post. And I was like, oh yes, let's talk about ethics in social media. So, I mean, student-led is great because it could also lead us to find those examples that we can use then. And so once I, have that example, I just keep a Word document for each class with ideas that I can refer back to every time, so that I don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, because we do teach at APUS, like I said, on 8-week templates, and even though we do have a little bit of freedom, a lot of times it's, for lack of a better way of saying it, easier to stay with the template because we are inundated with other tasks as teachers. And so anytime I can, have that little cheat sheet for me for a class, when I know what I'm getting assigned to teach, I will pull up my cheat sheet and be ready to, to pull that out as examples. And some other things I do in the, at APUS too, and I thought about it, I teach a journalism history class. And one of the assignments I do is I make them watch old Camel News Caravan videos and compare and contrast then, the way things looked historically and now. And I also have introduced them to Jack Lalanne. Nobody knows who Jack Lalanne is, but personal fitness guru and the juice guy. And so I love media history, and I'm able to talk about Jack Lalanne, make students like, well, who's this guy? And I'm like, well, you can compare him to like an influencer of days gone by, right? An influencer before we knew what influencers were, so to speak, right? So, but yeah, student-led definitely leads to some of the best ideas because they help you generate those. So that's wonderful.
Well, and I like this. I was just pulling up an example. I'm going to put a link from a old BuzzFeed article in the chat. I don't know if y'all heard this or saw this, but there was this high school teacher who was keeping a list of Gen Z slang terms that he heard in the classroom. And then it became this really great archive. And then when he finally shared it, And you can scroll through the article to see some of the examples of like words. So he says, like, when I think of a snack, I think Cheez-Its. It wasn't until a month ago that I learned an attractive person is a snack. And so it's like this really interesting way of realizing that words and language change over time, of course, but that the way that we communicate with each other, and then it becomes an interesting moment to capture those differences and how we recognize those differences. And so for me, this goes back to that example or the question that you were asking, Amanda, is how do we argue for using these moments in the classroom? Is that when we start documenting how there are generational differences, for instance, or how current events kind of change the way that we think about things, it can become a really interesting archive or dictionary. And so I was thinking, Allison, like maybe you could share your collected examples over time and how interesting that could become to when you find those examples. We would probably be curious to see what you collected and why.
That's a great idea. And I know that when we do our communication, faculty meetings or, and just being able to share, I know that we have one coming up, a training on coming up on how we use discussions and announcements, and, being able to pull everyone's ideas, I think is a valuable tool. It's how I came up with Jack Lalanne as a tool. I mean,
Yeah, so many great examples. Oh, here's a long, let's see. Oh, so there's a couple posts in here from Lindsay and Hannah about teaching literature and bringing in modern examples. When is it appropriate when the topics? What is the line between engaging and alienating? How do we provide good examples that work well within the discipline? This is some interesting questions. I've also noticed in some of my discussions when students bring in examples and student-led discussions, a lot of them pick examples that are not ubiquitous, that not everybody knows. And they certainly talk about things that I don't know. And it's interesting, the media niches, right? So how do you do that? How do you expand an example so that everybody understands it?
Can I tackle that really quick? I'll try to be super fast here with a little 2-minute drill with tackling this lovely post from Hannah. Thank you so much. And maybe relate it to Jane Austen, right? How do you work in the period content? And I'll tell you something that's starting to feel like period content, James Bond. We mentioned that that example of Column 2113 that I think Allison Slades has had a sample of this, teaching this text, and I'll leave her some space to chime in. But this has been a class where, while she doesn't see all the feedback necessary all the time, I'm someone behind the scenes where I get the data, right? I'm gauging the reaction from students over the many course offerings, right, over several years. And we integrated the spy genre as a learning tool. It was kind of inspired by some of the reading texts, because some of those authors perform analytic, deep dives into spy texts within the chapters. And so it felt organic, but also it's fun. Like, it's a fun genre. It can be fun. Maybe, I don't know if it used to be fun or it can still be fun. I'm not sure. But one thing I do notice is, and I appreciate that genre greatly, but over time, and it happened when I was trying to screen material for an on-ground class, like what can I show? What will I show? What should I show? Is some of those more problematic elements. And actually, we're trying to engage it. One week we asked them to watch a documentary on it that's quite explicit in the kind of the problematic tropes in Bond's history. But for some students, it is, I like that term, alienating. That it's not registering to them yet that we're doing critical work, that we're not worshiping these spy texts and artifacts. We're allowing them a space to assess that, right? To love it or leave it, or both, right? However, we've seen that consistent data feedback that maybe the genre is too niche, it's too much of a subgenre, I guess, too far outside of bounds. And so we're open to that reinvention cycle of how to integrate pop culture. We're ready to take a more inclusive turn with the genre we use in that class. It's one of the classes that are next on deck to revisit, revise, and enhance in ways that can be more inclusive to our student audience. And I think that's something to think about as online educators. You do have a service to those students. I know the classical model, the classroom model teaches us something different, especially at larger universities. It's what I say goes. And if you can't keep up, you're let the tide sweep you away. I'll just keep going to that. But online learning is different. Like, these people come back to school for a reason. They have purpose. Like, they have real things happening in life that necessitate why they're in an online education. So I've increasingly over the years felt conviction to not simply make pop culture an easier way to learn, but to also be malleable to evolving assignments so that there are valuable takeaways. Because I see urgent questions from students like, how does this make me make money? Like, how can I get a job, studying this artifact? And I do think putting serious thought to that when we build our assignments is really, there's an ethical component that we want to have fun and we want to have some fanciful things, but we have to also come back to center at times and think, what does my primary student demographic need to take away from this?
And I'll weigh in on that as well, because I do teach those classes also. And I think something that's interesting, a phrase that came to mind immediately is variety is the spice of life, right? And you can't please everybody all the time, but you can please some of the people some of the time. And so, an example I mentioned in the chat earlier is that, for example, I use Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, to teach. In some cases, I have clips that I use to teach narrative analysis, talking about lighting and costuming and those sorts of things. But then other cases, I use it to teach something different. But most students, young or old, are not familiar with a musical that is a Broadway show. But then they're shocked to find out that it's a movie with Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, and then they watch the clips, and inevitably, I also get I can't wait to see the whole thing because now I want to know what happens. And so I think when we do use things that might be engaging to us and maybe perhaps alienating, not everybody's a Broadway person or a musical movie person. However, you can, I think, shape and frame these examples in certain ways that can draw people in. So like for Sweeney Todd, I have found that if in the video discussion prompt for using that particular example and then posting the clips, that if I actually read from Stephen Sondheim's book of magic, his actual blurb and take on his play or his musical, that then is kind of a great teaser for students to want to engage more with that particular movie. And so, Sweeney Todd is one of the best examples. I mean, I live with a Broadway kid who can go backwards and forwards with Broadway, so I listen, a lot of that stuff, but not everybody likes musicals. But however, just trying to find something in each artifact or each example that can engage at some level with people. I mean, Sweeney Todd is a tragic love story, right? And so people can kind of relate with that, with the despair and the hurt and the tragedy, even if it's in a, set in London and they're making human meat pies. So there you go.
And on that note, I think it's just about time to wrap it up. We're going to finish this panel. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. And thank you so much for everyone for commenting and offering your own examples. I think I speak for everyone on our roundtable when I say it was a joy and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
This was fun. Thank you.
And thank you to the professional development.
Yeah, thank you, Callie.
This is a great group.
Oh, we love these panels.